June 12, 1945, New York Harbor. The great troop ship groaned against the dock as morning fog rolled across the water. Below deck, 147 German women sat in darkness, hands trembling, throats dry. They had not slept in 11 days. Every creak of the hull sounded like a cell door closing. Every footstep above deck sounded like judgment coming. These were nurses, prisoners, enemies of the most powerful nation on earth, and they were about to discover that everything they had been told about Americans was a lie. If you're watching from the United States, Germany, the UK, or anywhere else in the world, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a like. Share where you're from in the comments, because this story crosses every border, every battlefield, every lie ever told in wartime. This is about the moment when enemies became healers, when hatred dissolved into something no propaganda could explain. Stay until the very end, because what happens in those American hospitals will change how you see war, enemies, and what it truly means to be human. The metal gangplank lowered with a clang that echoed across the harbor like a gunshot. The 147 women stood frozen on deck, staring down at American soil through salt-stung eyes. Armed soldiers lined both sides of the walkway. Their boots gleamed, their rifles rested on their shoulders. And in that moment, the women realized this was not liberation. This was the reckoning they had feared since the day Germany surrendered. Elsa Kleiner, 23 years old, from Berlin, gripped the railing with white knuckles. She carried a small notebook in her coat pocket. Inside were 312 names. Every soldier she had watched die on the Eastern Front. She wondered if her name would soon be written in someone else's book. Beside her stood Liesel Hartmann from Vienna, 24, whose hands still bore scars from performing an amputation by candlelight when the generator failed. And Anna Weber from Dresden, 26, who had treated burn victims the night Allied bombs turned her city into an inferno that killed 25,000 people in 2 nights. These women had stitched wounds under bombing raids. They had amputated limbs in tents that shook with artillery fire. They had held dying boys who called for mothers in languages they barely understood. Now they were about to face the enemy they had been trained to fear above all others. The Americans, the monsters, the ones who showed no mercy. The war in Europe had ended 35 days earlier. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. But for these 147 nurses, the war had only transformed into something worse. Uncertainty? In the final weeks before capture, they had survived on 800 calories per day. Some had eaten less. German radio had spent years telling them that American soldiers were cruel, that prisoners in American hands were beaten, starved, disappeared without trace. The Nazi regime had painted the enemy as demons who would extract revenge for every German bullet, every bomb, every crime committed in Hitler's name. Now those demons waited at the bottom of the gangplank. The first woman stepped down. Her boot struck metal. The sound rang out across the pier. One step, then another. Then all 147 were walking in single file down toward American soil. The June sun was warm. The air smelled of salt and gasoline and something else, something cooking nearby that made their empty stomachs twist with hunger. At the bottom, a woman in an American military uniform stepped forward. Tall, graying hair pinned beneath her cap. Her posture was straight. Her expression was firm but not cruel. Colonel Margaret Harper, senior officer in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. She raised her hand. The German nurses stopped walking. Silence fell across the dock, and then she spoke in German. Her accent was imperfect but clear. You are prisoners of war, but you are also nurses. You will be sent to military hospitals across the United States. There you will assist in the care of wounded American soldiers. You will be treated with the respect due to medical personnel under the Geneva Convention. The women stared. Some did not believe what they heard. Respect from the enemy? This had to be a trick, a lie to make them cooperate before the real punishment began. But there was no punishment. Instead, American personnel guided them toward waiting vehicles. Not prison trucks, not armored transports. Red Cross ambulances and civilian buses with cushioned seats. The doors opened. American hands helped them climb aboard. No one shouted. No one shoved. No one pointed a weapon. The buses drove north into New Jersey. Through the windows, the German nurses watched America roll past. Green trees, paved roads. Neat houses with gardens and parked automobiles. Everything looked untouched by war. No bombed buildings, no rubble. No refugees walking with bundles on their backs. Elsa pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She thought of Berlin, where entire neighborhoods had been reduced to dust and ash. Here was America, whole, clean, impossibly peaceful. The buses stopped at a military processing center, large, white, surrounded by trimmed lawns. Inside, the women were divided into groups and led to examination rooms. American nurses in pressed uniforms conducted thorough medical checks: temperature, blood pressure, eyes, ears, teeth, skin. The process was professional, clinical. There was no roughness, no humiliation. After examinations, the women were taken to a supply room where neatly folded uniforms waited on tables. American nurse uniforms. White dresses with matching caps. Stockings, leather shoes in multiple sizes. Liesel held up her new dress. The fabric was soft. The stitching was perfect. She had not worn anything this clean in over a year. On the Eastern Front, she had patched her uniform with scraps from dead soldiers' coats. Now she was holding clothing that looked like it came from a department store. Next came the showers. Hot water, real soap, towels that were thick and white. Anna stood under the stream and let the heat soak into her muscles. She could not remember the last time she had bathed with warm water. After showers, the women were led to a dining hall. Long tables set with plates, forks, napkins. American kitchen staff brought out trays of food. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes with butter, fresh green vegetables, red rolls still warm from the oven, and for dessert, apple pie with coffee and real cream. Elsa sat down. She looked at the plate in front of her. Her hands trembled. In Germany, civilians were surviving on 1,000 calories per day. She had once gone 3 days eating nothing but stale bread and turnip soup. She picked up her fork and took a bite of the pie. The sweetness spread across her tongue. The crust was flaky. The apples were soft and warm. And then the tears came. She did not sob. She did not make a sound. The tears simply rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto the table. She was not crying from sadness. She was crying because someone had fed her like a human being. Around the room, other women were crying too, quietly, over their plates of chicken and potatoes, over their cups of real coffee. That night, the nurses slept in clean barracks with real beds, sheets, pillows, blankets that did not smell of blood or smoke. Elsa whispered to her bunkmate in the darkness. "They gave us uniforms like we are still nurses." Her friend replied softly. "They gave us dignity." And in that moment, something shifted. The propaganda began to crack. The lies began to crumble. Because kindness, after years of war, felt almost unbearable. The trains left New Jersey on June 15, 1945. 7 different trains heading in 7 different directions. Each carried a group of German nurses toward American military hospitals that desperately needed help. The war had ended in Europe, but the wounded kept arriving. Every day, transport ships docked at American ports carrying broken soldiers from the battlefields of France, Belgium, and Germany. Young men with missing arms, shattered legs, faces burned beyond recognition, minds destroyed by what they had seen. By June 1945, over 670,000 American soldiers had been wounded in the European theater alone. Another 250,000 had been wounded fighting in the Pacific. The hospitals needed 12,000 additional nurses just to meet basic care standards. They had fewer than 8,000, so the German prisoners became workers. Elsa's train headed west toward Kansas. She sat by the window and watched America pass by. Endless farmland. Golden wheat fields stretching to the horizon. Small towns with white churches and main streets lined with shops. Children playing in yards. Women hanging laundry on clotheslines. Everything was untouched. Whole. Alive. Elsa thought about the train rides she had taken across. Germany in 1944. Bombed out stations. Destroyed bridges. Refugees crowded into cattle cars with everything they owned tied in bedsheets. She had seen a child freeze to death on a platform in Munich because the train was delayed 12 hours in the snow. Here, the American train had cushioned seats. A dining car serving sandwiches and coffee. Clean bathrooms. The contrast was almost too painful to understand. On June 18th, the trains began arriving at their destinations. German nurses stepped off onto platforms where military personnel waited with trucks and instructions. At a military hospital outside Topeka, Kansas, Elsa and 14 other German nurses were led through the front entrance. The building was massive, 3 stories tall, over 400 beds. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and bandages. Somewhere deeper inside, someone was screaming. The head nurse, Captain Dorothy Wells, met them in the lobby. Stern, in her 40s, sharp eyes. No patience for nonsense. She looked the German women up and down. You will work 6-day weeks, 8-hour shifts. You will follow orders from American medical staff. You will treat every patient with professionalism. You are prisoners, but you are also nurses. Act like it. Then she handed each woman a name badge and a ward assignment. Elsa was assigned to Ward C amputees. Her hand shook as she pinned the badge to her uniform. She followed an American nurse down a long corridor. Polished tile floors. Pale green walls. Through open doors she could see rows of hospital beds, men lying motionless. Men with stumps where legs used to be. Men with bandages covering half their faces. The American nurse stopped at a doorway. This is your ward, 42 patients. Most lost limbs at the Battle of the Bulge or during the Rhine crossing. Some have infections. Some have phantom pain. All of them have been through hell. She paused and looked directly at Elsa. They know you're German. Some will refuse your care. Some will say ugly things. Do your job anyway. Then she walked away. Elsa stood alone in the doorway. Inside the ward, dozens of eyes turned toward her. American eyes, soldiers who had fought against her country. Men who had watched their friends die at the hands of German bullets and bombs. One man, a sergeant with both legs amputated below the knee, stared at her uniform, then at her face. Then he spat on the floor. They're making us get cared for by Nazis now. What's next? Hitler himself comes to fluff my pillow? A few men laughed. Most stayed silent. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Elsa took a breath. She walked to the first bed. A young private, maybe 19 years old, with his right arm missing at the shoulder. His chart hung on a hook at the foot of the bed. Infection. Dressing change needed twice daily. Morphine every 4 hours for pain. She looked at him. He looked away. She set the chart down. I am here to change your bandages, she said in halting English. The private said nothing. Elsa gathered her supplies. Clean gauze, antiseptic, scissors, tape. Her hands moved automatically. She had done this 1,000 times before. On German soldiers. On Russian prisoners. On dying boys who called for their mothers in languages she did not speak. She began to unwrap the bandages on the private's shoulder. He flinched, but did not pull away. The wound beneath was red and raw. She cleaned it gently. Applied fresh antiseptic. Wrapped it in new gauze with precise, careful folds. When she finished, the private finally looked at her. His eyes were hard, suspicious. But he nodded once. It was not trust. But it was not hatred either. It was a beginning. The first week was the hardest. Elsa worked her 8-hour shifts in silence. She changed bandages. She adjusted morphine drips. She cleaned wounds that smelled of infection and rotting tissue. She did not speak unless spoken to. She moved quietly between beds like a shadow. Most patients ignored her. A few muttered insults under their breath. One man refused to let her touch him at all. He demanded an American nurse every time she approached. But on the 5th day, something changed. The young private with the missing arm was running a fever. His wound had become infected. The skin around the stitches was hot and swollen. He needed constant monitoring. Elsa checked his temperature every 2 hours. She applied cold compresses to his forehead. She cleaned his wound 3 times that day, each time more carefully than the last. She did not speak. She simply worked. By evening, the fever broke. The private's temperature dropped back to normal. He opened his eyes and saw Elsa standing beside his bed, checking his chart. You stayed, he said. His voice was rough and tired. Elsa nodded. You needed care. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, thank you. It was the first time an American soldier had thanked her. Across the country in California, Anna Weber faced a different challenge. She had been assigned to the burn ward at a naval hospital in San Diego. The patients there were Marines who had fought in the Pacific. Many had been burned by flamethrowers on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Their injuries were severe. Some had lost fingers. Others had faces so scarred they could barely open their mouths to eat. The smell in the burn ward was unforgettable. Charred skin, antiseptic ointment, the sickly sweet odor of healing flesh. It turned Anna's stomach the first time she entered. But she had smelled worse. In Dresden, she had treated burn victims pulled from buildings that were still smoking. On her third day, Anna assisted in surgery. A 21-year-old Marine needed skin grafts on his chest and arms. The American surgeon, Major Richard Calloway, was exhausted. He had performed 11 surgeries in 3 days. His hand shook slightly as he prepared his instruments. Anna stepped forward. "I can assist," she said. Major Calloway looked at her. He hesitated. Then he nodded. "Have you done this before?" "Many times," Anna replied. During the operation, Anna handed him instruments before he asked. Scalpel, forceps, sutures. Her movements were smooth, automatic, born of field hospitals where hesitation meant death. When it ended, Major Calloway pulled off his gloves and studied her. "You've got good hands." "Steady hands. I was trained well." "Where before? The Eastern Front? And Dresden?" He nodded. He knew what Dresden meant. "Then you've seen hell." "Yes," Anna said. "Like these boys." In Illinois, Liesl Hartman worked a rehabilitation ward filled with men learning how to exist again. Prosthetic legs, artificial arms, broken futures. Among them was Sergeant William Crawford, 28, a former ranch hand who had lost both legs at the Battle of the Bulge. He fell often. He cursed often. Once he shouted, "I wouldn't be like this if it wasn't for you people." Liesl said nothing. She lifted him back into his chair. Weeks later, after walking 15 steps unaided, Crawford stopped, shaking. "I hated Germans," he said. "Thought you were monsters." For months, she became his eyes describing skies, sunlight, letters from home. One afternoon, he handed her a small wooden box. Inside was his unopened purple heart. "I can't see it," he said. "But you can. Carry it for me." "I can't," she whispered. "You've survived the same hell," he replied. "You deserve something that says so." She accepted it with trembling hands. By Christmas, military reports noted improved morale and recovery in wards staffed by German nurses. This was not policy. It was humanity. In January 1946, Colonel Margaret Harper recommended the nurses be allowed to remain. The War Department agreed. In 1947, they were given a choice. 73 returned home. 74 stayed. Elsa stayed in Kansas and became an American nurse. Liesl returned. Liesl met his eyes. "We were told the same about Americans," he nodded. "And now?" "Now I think war makes liars of everyone." By December 1945, something quiet was happening in American military hospitals. In Kansas, Elsa arrived at her ward to find a cup of hot coffee waiting. A note lay beside it. "For the nurse who doesn't sleep, bed 14. Coffee had been nearly non-existent in Germany. She drank it slowly. Every sip tasted like forgiveness. In Illinois, Liesl was called over one evening. The men had pooled cigarette rations for weeks to buy her a single Hershey's bar. She tried to refuse. "You stayed when I screamed at night," one man said. Another added, "You treat us like we still matter." Liesl broke the chocolate into pieces and passed it around. "Then we share it," she said. Like family. In California, Anna cared for Thomas Garrett, a Marine blinded on Okinawa to Austria, riding Crawford until his death. Anna kept Thomas's medal for 56 years. In her will, she returned it with a letter. "Blindness is not in the eyes, but in the heart. Their story is rarely told, what it should be, because it proves that compassion, not conquest, wins the longest wars. They arrived as enemies. They left as healers. And in choosing to see one another as human, they achieved the only victory that lasts."